Welcome to Marching Towards Menstrual Equity, a Georgia STOMP Town Hall. I'm Claire Cox, co-lead along with Adele Stewart of Georgia STOMP. Georgia STOMP is a growing coalition of 23 organizations with a reach of more than 50,000 Georgians for the purpose of addressing the issues of menstrual equity and period poverty elimination in our state. We have worked for the last 4 years to eliminate the discriminatory tax on menstrual products in Georgia, while seeking methods to address period poverty and lack of access in Georgia's schools, prisons, and following a natural catastrophe. We have learned a lot. For example, did you know that Georgia doesn't have luxury taxes? When you Google eliminating sales taxes on menstrual products, that's the first phrase you'll see. But in Georgia, items are either tax exempt or not. No items are assessed a luxury tax. And other words matter too. For example, feminine hygiene products are cleansing products like douches and wipes. Menstrual products refer to pads and tampons, cups, and period panties. We also have learned there is much still to know. Thankfully, working with Georgia STOMP Coalition leaders, we learn from each other. And it was at our fall summit meeting that the seeds for tonight's event were planted. And Adele and I want to thank Jamie Lackey and Dominique Holloman for the time they gave to helping us define how a public awareness event might look and occur in the midst of a pandemic. Tonight, we're assisted by Rachel Gamble. And before I proceed, I also want to thank her for helping us with any technical issues like being muted that might occur during the evening. You can help us make this public awareness event even more successful by simply sharing the live stream to your personal Facebook page or your organization's page. Please do that right now to enable more views. And if you want to join in on the discussion, enter your questions in the comments on Georgia STOMP's Facebook, and we'll do our best to include them tonight. So to get things going, let me introduce the members of the first of 3 panels this evening. Everyone not on the first panel, can you stop your camera temporarily, and we'll see you in a minute. So our first panel tonight is Reimagining Equitable Spaces. And on the panel are Jamie Lackey. After nearly 20 years as a social worker, Jamie saw firsthand that mothers she served couldn't afford the basic necessities to care for their babies and children. So she formed Helping Mamas, a network of 150 partner organizations across the state, serving over 55,000 families to distribute essential baby items such as diapers, clothing, baby wipes, strollers, and car seats, and items mothers need, such as period products. Stella Kwan is a junior at Brookwood High School and co-founder and president of La Luna, a nonprofit dedicated to providing period packages and educational content to marginalized communities across the U.S. Mary Lauren Salvatore is the Integrated Wellness Coordinator in the Office of Whole Child Supports at the Georgia Department of Education. Mary Lauren is a certified health education specialist and holds a master's in public health from Emory University's Rollins School of Public Health. And finally, Mara Dodson brings over 12 years of experience working in adult and juvenile confinement settings. She's a former correctional consultant with the Moss Group, where she specialized in gender responsive prison management. So for the first panel, Georgia STOMP was formed when organizations across the state came together to work to eliminate the sales tax on menstrual products. As we began to dive deeper into the world of menstrual equity, we started questioning things like why menstrual products weren't available in restrooms, just like toilet paper and soap, etc., and why menstruators have such a hard time getting the products they need in schools and when incarcerated. So, join us in suspending reality for a moment and reimagine what menstrual equity looks like in our public spaces and schools. So I want to start the panel with first questions to what changes have you seen in your area of work and what could be done further? And let's start with Mary Lauren. Let's start with you. So that would be primarily schools. What changes have you seen in your area of work and what could be done further?
Thanks, Claire, and thanks again for having me here. I'm really excited to be able to represent the Department of Education tonight. Throughout the pandemic, it's been really interesting to see this progression that's changed in really bringing student and staff health and well-being to the forefront. I've been at the department for almost 2.5 years, and starting out and just trying to bring in a public health and education perspective around all things non-academic to an education space was a very new thing. And it's unfortunate that we had to have a pandemic occur to start really shedding a light on student health services and the needs that schools do provide and the services that they could provide. It's been really exciting to see this shift and this awareness building around really the importance of what students and staff should be able to rely on in school buildings. So it's been really great to be able to partner with Georgia STOMP and to understand the work that they've been doing to put schools at the priority of their efforts and this funding to make sure that students come to school and they have the things that they need. And they've been incredibly thoughtful in including us as part of these conversations to really understand. They've utilized school nurses and school nurse leadership across the state, which is a really great group of people I'm happy to be able to work with to really understand at the local level what those gaps looked like, which is really important. So it's been a really great conversation to have. And as we are kind of reimagining what school looks like over the next year and when kids hopefully come back in the fall, what are some ways that we're going to be able to transform the things that students may not have had before, and look at that a little bit differently coming back in the fall. So I'm excited to see kind of what changes we'll make. And I think as a public health professional, always excited to see this type of effort that's a really big prevention level effort coming forward and being paid attention to. And also as a great opportunity to build education around this for school age kids, just to build that awareness from a young age. So it's a really exciting time, I think, to be in the health and public health space. So I'm excited to learn more from my co-panelists today about what everybody else has been doing.
So as we're talking about schools, let's move to Stella, who is a high school student and has been working in this space. So Stella, what changes have you seen since you've been working with La Luna, and what could be done further?
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me as well. I'm so excited to be here. I've definitely seen just so many different creative ways that we've tackled the issue of menstrual inequities. And I think that in this line of work, it's obviously we've all been called to address this issue when this basic fundamental right is not afforded to all menstruators across the state of Georgia and the US in general. And as a high school student myself, I think that a lot of it has to do with the stigma surrounding menstruation and just having sort of these discussions. And it starts with education and talking and learning about menstruation. And so I think that the pandemic especially has caused a lot of people to get creative with the ways, whether it's advocacy or the programs themselves. And so I think whether it's talking to parents directly, especially mothers, about how to talk to their daughters about menstruation, or whether it's directly addressing the lack of period products in schools and providing that and donating that. I definitely think that there's been a wide array of ways to tackle this issue that are all equally as important, and as a student that I appreciate very much.
Jamie, what about you? Because you work with a lot of different type of situations and families and schools. So what changes have you seen in your work, and what could be done further?
I think that's a great question. Thanks for having me. I think what we've seen is just a general awareness and understanding that this is an issue and that there's a way to get involved and help. And across the country, we all started as diaper banks, right? Like that's what we did. And we very quickly added period products as an item that people need. We went last year from it being something we just launched to it being our second most distributed item, to the tune of nearly 1 million distributed over the course of last year. So what we saw was just like this general awareness that 1, there's a need, 2, there's a way to give back, and 3, you can ask for help for it. Because I think with the pandemic, so many people were relying, especially those that were in school, were relying on school nurses, teachers, social workers. And when the school shut down, that wasn't an option, and people had to get creative, which meant we had to get creative with where and how we distributed the product, because it was such a need, and it was an overnight need. And, you know, I think a lot of attention was drawn to that during the pandemic for good reasons, because it's such now more a highlighted area, because people lost their normal avenues that they were possibly getting these items from. And so it became an issue, and we've seen that raise the spotlight on everything. I think that's been fantastic for the issue. I think we could always do better at making products more accessible. I mean, that's always going to be the problem. They always need to be more accessible. They should be in all bathrooms, just like toilet paper, like you mentioned. That would cut down on so much lack of need, so much more engagement with administrators in activities. They wouldn't be missing work, school, and other related activities as regularly, because they know, and they would have confidence that they're available in public restrooms and places where they frequent.
Thank you. So Mara, your experience has been more with working with prison population and those women and others who are detained in our prison system. So talk about that a minute. What changes have you seen there?
Yeah, well, across the country, I think states are at different stages of sort of how they are allowing access to menstrual products. And we are really happy to say that Georgia's actually ahead of the game in a lot of ways, and worked with the legislature and with the commissioner in Georgia, and was very supportive of providing accessible menstrual products in all the women's facilities. And I think that's a wonderful step in the right direction. I think there's a lot of other things that are happening that are supporting that in terms of policy changes at the facility levels. That's really important to talk about accessibility, for the staff to understand that they're supposed to make sure that those items are accessible and available at all times, and that no one needs to ask them for those items, which is a really big hindrance and barrier sometimes. The other thing that I think is really important is also the variety of not just providing pads, but also tampons is really important, a change that's happened over time. I think what's exciting as well is that in women's services across the country, women weren't really considered for quite a long time in prisons generally. And only really in the 1990s, when the women's population started to increase in prisons, did we start seeing this transformation of research and best practice, and also a position that's really important in many prison systems called the Female Services Director, who could really oversee hygiene products and making sure property items were really available to those women whenever they needed them. So I'm really pleased to see that we're going in the right direction, and that states are kind of in varying places. But I think as we move forward, implementation is really important in terms of, even in states, our neighboring states, there are challenges sometimes, because whenever you have scarcity in resources, is which women see every resource that's given to them in prison as scarce, then there's a challenge around managing that product and accessibility. And so sometimes you tend to see challenges around women hoarding items that they need, and not being able to manage the supply and demand as accurately as you want. So that's a challenge that I think prison administrators are still facing. I think another challenge is around the juvenile side. So, you know, girls are getting their period while they're in juvenile confinement. And in many places that I've worked, the girls have to ask for those items from a staff member, and they're given limited items. It's not like they're available just in the bathroom when they walk in. And there's a lot of different reasons for that, but I think that's still a real challenge and an opportunity for juvenile facilities to kind of work a bit more around how they can educate staff and provide different policies for access. And then of course, jails are operated independently. And I just read a fascinating stat that there are about 3,000 sheriffs in the country, and about 60 of those are women. And so if you think about how that translates to who's really thinking about the women in these jails, the sheriffs that are men, maybe not so much. They don't understand maybe the needs. And so I think there's an awareness that's got to happen at the jail level that's really targeted and specific. And I think jails are doing it all very differently, and some are in great shape and doing wonderful work around accessibility, but others, I think it's a very limited access. And so there may be allotted 5 tampons or 5 pads, and they have to ask for more, or they have to get a family member to bring them and pay for them. So I think there's a lot of limitations still, and it really varies based on jurisdiction and state.
Thank you. Yes. So we've already kind of hinted at the question too that I'm going to ask, but soon after Georgia Stomp began, we all came to this realization that when a man enters a bathroom, like we've talked about, he has everything he needs: soap, towels, toilet paper, water, but a woman doesn't. And that was somewhat revolutionary and a kind of an aha moment for me and for other eyes, and then to verbalize it. So have there been any light bulb or aha moments where you've tried to push the boundaries in terms of menstrual equity? And I'm going to try not to go in the same order this time. So I'm going to go to Jamie first this time.
Sorry, yeah, I think anytime you talk about this topic, it's pushing a boundary, right? Like it's not something that's talked about on a regular basis. You know, recently we purchased a new van, or purchased our first van for our organization to do mobile distributions, and we very deliberately put distributing period products on the side of our van, so that it was widely known that it was a need. And here we are driving down, you know, interstates in Atlanta with distributing period products, you know, going down alongside of us. You know, it was very important to us that it's one of the first things we talk about because of what we're known for. And so anytime that we have the opportunity now, you know, you talked about it being, you know, almost taboo, something you don't talk about. We talk about it all the time now with corporate groups. I don't care if it's a corporate group of all men in the room or on Zoom. It's something that gets mentioned every single time because it's such an important issue. And for so long, we've made it an issue that is simply about women. And we need men to be behind this as well and stepping up and being a part of it. And you can't do that if you can't get them talking about it. So we recently had a teenage boy had to do a service project, and he did period product kits, and he brought in a whole bunch of period product kits. And I was like, you know, I mean, whether his mom made him do it or not, I don't know, but it was just the most amazing thing that we'd come so far, and that we're talking about it so openly that a high school teenager male felt comfortable collecting period products and then donating them. So for us, it's just being very bold all the time. And it's sad that we have to say that talking about something that affects, you know, half our population is bold. Why are we pushing the boundaries on something that's so common? And so, it happens to every, you know, all the time. So why does it have to be so controversial? You know, and that's kind of where we're trying to get out of that realm in our own personal thinking within our organization. So we put it on the side of our van. So we felt like that was a pretty bold statement.
That's bold. That's great, Jamie. Always doing great work. Yeah, I mean, we talked about at the beginning that words matter, and just starting to call it what it is and say the words and being bold. Thank you. Mara, let's go back to you real quick on that. Any aha moments or thoughts or light bulbs when you kind of realized you were pushing the boundaries? Or
I think some aha moments is the need to educate women coming into our prisons and into our juvenile facilities just about hygiene and health, feminine health. And it's related so much to, you know, the pathway that women come to our prisons. Many of them haven't had the resources or the family members or the mentors to teach them about some of these challenges. And so they do feel the shame, or they don't have the right language for it. And so I think that was a big aha moment of adding in more education and opportunities for women to really talk about that once they're in prison. I think another big area is around the quality of products that are provided to women incarcerated or justice involved women, because a lot of the products are so thin or just really not absorbent at all. And I think that's a real challenge. And so I think that just quality of access to those products is huge and something that's not talked about a lot, because I think a lot of people say, well, we offered this, so we're done. You know, we've done our job. And I think that prison administrators thinking a bit more about the quality of the resource is really important. And I think the other thing that's kind of interesting and adjacent is around this idea that in prisons, it's all about safety and security. And there's a real unique situation where actually women staff were walking through body scanners to get to the prison, and they were being asked to go home because they had tampons in, and the body scanner was picking them up on the body scan and saying that they had contraband. And so I think that there's this bigger conversation to be had in these spaces around any woman and having to go through any kind of security, and it's not being thought of that that's part of being a woman, and they're being asked to go home and they're being shamed about it. And so that's an issue that's come up in other states not in Georgia particularly, but I think something to be aware of, that just all women coming into these prison systems for safety and security, and they're kind of being asked to go home because they're using tampons and they're being seen in the body scan. So those are some aha moments of a way to expand the conversation and bring in more people to really think about what we're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely. That's an aha moment for me. I hadn't heard that one yet. So
there's a big lawsuit coming down.
Stella, how about you too? Any aha moments or a time when light bulbs gone off for you in this work?
Yeah, definitely. I think that a lot of the time, without a lot of communication or discussion about this topic, it's really easy to think that these obstacles and struggles are just sort of a normal part of life, and that they shouldn't kind of be afforded to everybody. I think for me, especially coming from a low income background and also as a student, it wasn't until I started talking to my peers that I realized that they had experienced the same things that I have, and that this was just sort of a really big issue that should not be, I think, a big issue, or it shouldn't be very stigmatized. And I think just from an understanding where it's just like a woman's problem, and whether you know a menstruator or you are a menstruator, I think that just raising awareness about the fact that this does affect everybody, and that it shouldn't just be, I think, women advocating for this issue. And I think that also thinking about different backgrounds, intersectional feminism, how this affects people from different cultures, different gender identities, different how it affects these different communities. I think that it definitely, I think that the discussion has definitely been sort of an aha moment in every single, I think, conversation that I've had with fellow students and also like teachers. I think that even in health class, when we're not really taught about what menstruation is, or when a young girl gets like bullied for holding a pad because it resembles like a diaper or something that people just aren't familiar with. I think that all of these things are experiences that we've all faced and shared. And I think that that's sort of the root of what we have to tackle and what we have to address, is just how to make this a topic that is relatable to everybody and something that everyone should care about.
Right, thank you. That's going to lead into our second panel in a minute when we talk about those cultural barriers and differences. But before we get there, Mary Lauren, any aha moments, or where do you see pushing the boundaries here?
Yeah, so it's been really interesting to listen to the stories that you all have shared, your aha moments. And I'm kind of remembering when I first connected with Adele and Claire and learned about what they were doing and what Georgia STOMP was all about, and just kind of having an aha moment at that point, I think, in realizing that this was a really big deal to be bringing this into schools and to be having this conversation at a state level. And I know that it's, a big national conversation as well. But just that this was something that we're even having to worry about right now. And so I'm so glad that there's all this awesome work being done and that we've made huge progress and, just being able to get the funding out to our school districts. And, a lot of the work that I have been doing over the past couple of years at DOE is around health barriers to learning. And in a short sense, that's about being able to come to school and be able to have your basic health needs met, things like being able to hear and see and not have chronic dental pain, but things that are preventing you from sitting in a chair and learning. This falls right in there with it. If a girl comes to school and she knows that she can't comfortably go to the bathroom or go see the nurse to get something that she needs, she's going to have a really hard time focusing the rest of the day at school. So I think it really fits kind of hand in hand in that. Just like a child should come to school and expect that they're going to be able to be fed breakfast and lunch and maybe a snack and maybe even supper, depending on what their school provides. It's kind of the same thing. They should be able to go and know that their hygiene needs are going to be met while they're in that building for the day. Another thing notable, as I was sharing with my team that I was going to be speaking on this panel, our office that I work in, the Office of All Child Supports, we support wraparound coordinators that are located within each regional education service agency in the state. And they provide a lot of resources that are location-based and work with our our school improvement schools in some of these areas. And I learned that in Southwest Georgia, one of our coordinators actually played a really integral role in helping to reverse a bag policy in schools that had been preventing girls from bringing the products into schools because they didn't have a bag that they could keep them in. So she was able to shift a bag policy to a no bag to a clear bag, I believe it was, so that girls could then have these things. And that was kind of the reason behind it, was recognizing this was an issue. So I thought that was just a really important thing to share, and something that, you know, in the local level, understanding what that policies and access and, you know, just what that looks like all across our state. I spent a lot of time in Southwest Georgia last year and just understanding the barriers that our rural counties have, just as much as I know as a lot of the same struggles that we have in, you know, in the city of Atlanta. So it's just been really eye-opening, I guess, and all of it kind of an aha for me of just understanding the great need that we have, and being able to see the great work that's being done to build awareness and really make change effectively.
This has been great. We've got 2 more panels to go, and I've got to be respectful of time. So for our last question, believe it or not, you're only going to have like 30 seconds or a minute to say, if you just throw that vision out there and say, what does menstrual equity look like in our public spaces and schools? 30 seconds, 45 seconds or so. Jamie, what does that look like to you?
Unlimited access. It's there. You can access it. You don't even have to ask anymore. It's just readily available for you, just like toilet paper.
Mara, what does that look like, particularly in prisons, but what does that look like in our public spaces?
I think Jamie's head on. I mean, unlimited access, but also I think this shared education and understanding for those that can help provide that access, as well as those who need the access. And I think that's something that is so critical.
Mary Lauren?
I'm going to say a health in all policies approach. I think that's going to be really important in schools moving forward, that in all of the policies and initiatives that are being developed, not just as a result of COVID, but as things that are sustainable moving forward to take care of students and their health and well-being, making this a priority and always being a part of the conversation.
Good. And Stella?
Yeah, I think that everybody before me has really hit the nail on the head. But I definitely think that what menstrual equity looks like is menstruators being able to pursue their education or their careers without being uninhibited by this lack of menstrual products, and that they can carry on their lives with basic dignity and confidence.
Right. Thank y'all all so much for sharing with us. We're going to have these 4 panelists stop their cameras, and the next 4 will get on, and we'll turn the next panel over to Adele Stewart.
Thank you, Claire. Oh my gosh, I was just furiously taking notes because that was such a fantastic panel, and you're so right. I think it led perfectly into what we're going to discuss on this panel, which is barriers, legislative, cultural, and financial. So we'll be focusing on how these barriers impact access to period products and menstrual equity. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists. First up, we have Dominique Holloman, who is the 31st president of the Junior League of Douglas County and the immediate past chair of the Junior Leagues of Georgia State Public Affairs Committee, which was an inaugural coalition member of Georgia STOMP. In her professional life, Dominique is a government affairs professional currently working as the government affairs manager at MARTA. Thanks for being here, Dominique. Next, we have Andrea Cook. Andrea is a married mother of 8 and is a doctoral candidate in marriage and family therapy. Her passion for menstrual equity is evidenced by her roles in 2 of Georgia STOMP's member organizations, Georgia Women and Making Periods Easier, and her research work in conjunction with Mercer University School of Medicine. You will often find Andrea on the road picking up or delivering supplies to families who need a little help, and maybe joining a Zoom call on the way. Amber Mack is the research and policy analyst at Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies Coalition of Georgia. Amber coordinates multi-sector working groups to address a range of maternal and infant health needs, including oral health, doula services, infant mortality, and access to care. She also manages research projects and evaluates the impact of Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies Coalition of Georgia programs. Engaging with legislators and advocates, she provides technical data support for policies that will improve maternal and infant health across the state of Georgia. Thanks for being here, Amber. And finally, we have Laura Register. Laura was an elected member of the Grady County Board of Education for 13 years. She has worked on statewide issues, which include but are not limited to public education, teen pregnancy prevention, and women's health. During the 2020 Georgia General Assembly legislative session, she worked as a legislative and political advisor, focusing on rural and education issues. Thanks for being here, Laura. Such a great panel before us. So a quick intro to what we'll talk about. There are numerous barriers to advancing menstrual equity, and we heard about some of them on the prior panel, be it cultural, so in trying to educate folks about the normalness of menstruation and making it more culturally acceptable to even talk about it in public spaces. We heard about some of the education needs. We heard about changing culture in the workplace. There were so many great things that our last panel touched on. But as Georgia STOMP moved into the legislative advocacy arena, we were met with not only legislative walls, like partisan ideological differences and budgetary constraints, but those cultural norms, including taboos on how and where menstruation is discussed and with what words. Most importantly, the deeper that we all on this panel have delved into menstrual equity, we realize that the influence that menstruation ends up having on women's wages, the lack of advancement opportunities and earnings have on access to health. And so I'd like to lead with a question of the barriers to menstrual equity that you have seen in your work. What is the most difficult to overcome? And Amber, I'll lead off with you.
Hey, so happy to be here. I would say the biggest barrier, and the previous panel touched on it, is having conversations with people about the need, especially when you're having a conversation about the financial need down at the Capitol, because it takes a certain level of privilege to be a state lawmaker, because you have to take time off of your work, raise funds for your campaign, all of that. So a lot of legislators aren't necessarily in the headspace to understand why somebody's spending X amount of dollars on a box of feminine care products, why that might break the bank for them. They don't, they don't have that frame of mind really. So having those conversations, having level setting, and just getting on the same page and just explaining to them why this is a reality for folks, I would say, is one of the biggest barriers I see.
Yeah, just that basic understanding, totally. Dominique, would you like to follow up?
I would. Thank you again for allowing me to be here as well. And I totally agree with Amber. That's what I have been sitting here thinking, is that especially down at the Capitol, the education piece, and then just getting people comfortable with talking about periods and menstruation in a public setting. But I think too, just also remembering that men don't think about what women need. And our state legislator is still predominantly male. And even though we've had significant increases in female legislators, which I think moving forward will make these conversations much easier, it's just remembering that though men have plenty of menstruators in their lives, they really haven't had to think about what's necessary and what the needs are. And so I think one, as an advocate, remembering that, that we're educating people at ground zero, but then also to, I won't say forcing, but encouraging people to become comfortable with the topic, with the language, and just public discourse.
So true. And how many times have you talked to a male lawmaker who said like, oh yeah, I have daughters, I know these are expensive. It really, they know, they know. Laura, would you like to add on what have been some of the most difficult barriers to overcome in your work regarding menstrual equity?
Yeah, thanks, Adele. And I want to just add on, I'll second everything that was said before me, but representation is a big deal. But not all women are still aware of all the needs and the reality of the needs of menstruating women and students. I was in a committee meeting last session where it was talked about having dispensary units in all the women's bathrooms. And there was one woman on the committee, and she, along with the men, agreed that we don't need the dispensing machines. They can go to the office and get what they need. And I talked to her afterwards, and using that analogy of, it's like having toilet paper. If you need it, you need it. You can't just take off running to somewhere else to get it. So I think that representation is important, but keeping that intelligent dialogue going and making it's uncomfortable for some people to talk about, but we got to have those conversations.
Andrea, round us out. What have you seen in your work?
Well, I want to thank you all for having me here. I'm really grateful to be able to share some of my experiences and be on the panel with such amazing other people. Because I'm a mental health professional, I think about things in terms of experience. And there are some major mental health ramifications for exactly what Laura was talking about. I mean, what if you're in a school that requires you wear khaki pants? It's a difficult thing to go from the restroom to the office to ask for supplies. And so I think it's important that we have unlimited access to supplies in bathrooms without concern for some of the things that we've heard in our advocacy to include or have menstrual supplies in the bathrooms is that they will clog up the plumbing, and some of the schools don't even keep trash cans in the bathrooms. And then there is also that issue where a lot of schools don't allow purses for young girls or anyone who's menstruating. I'm of the mindset that it should be available for anyone, because we don't know who's going into what restroom and who may need access to menstrual supplies. And it should be just as normal as paper towels and soap, those basics. But what I also, there is a lot of cultural stigma. That's one of the other big barriers that we face in this work, because we've had a tremendous amount of support with providing supplies. And so we're removing that financial barrier for some of the people that we're working with directly. And then we've had so much wonderful response from the work that Georgia STOMP has done to advance the information sharing about access to menstrual supplies. But the one thing that's been the most difficult is our interactions with girls directly and their parents, and just talking about menstruation periods. And so we can do more about talking about these things in public spaces, making it regular, normal conversation, where we're not hiding and shielding this natural process. And I think that we'll be moving the needle forward.
It's so poignant that you really point to what ends up being logistical challenges in many ways too. And we didn't even include logistical challenges in the name of this panel, but not being able to carry a bag, not being able to having to walk across campus with khaki pants like that. I mean, that is just straight up logistical. So thank you so much for bringing that up, Andrea. And I think what you say there about not hiding it really leads us nicely into our next question, which is, what changes have y'all seen in these barriers since 2018, the year that Georgia STOMP was created? And so, Laura, tell us what changes you've seen. Lead us off.
I have seen more awareness. I'm not the first person now that has talked to a legislator about this issue. I myself am more aware, so that when I was in restaurant in Dallas this past weekend, and there were products, there were tampons. And I walked back out to the table with my new son-in-law and daughter and husband. And I was like, y'all, I got to say something to the owner of this restaurant because they have tampons in the bathroom. And so, it was, my son-in-law expected that conversation to, it's not a surprise because we have conversations and it's, so I think I've seen more awareness. I've also talked to, when it first started talking about this project with the money going to schools, I was still on the school board, and I was talking to my school leadership, and they were not even aware that this could be happening. And so now they're more aware to reach out, and this is an issue. So let's try to get more funding and talk more about it.
Yeah, it's almost like the realm of possibility has kind of opened up in a way just through those conversations. Amber, I see you nodding along. Tell us what have you seen change?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I can only speak for last year's session and this session, but I agree in terms of awareness. I think when you have pieces of legislation or funds earmarked in the budget for things related to menstrual equity, it causes people to ask questions and have conversations. So, if I'm a legislator who wasn't previously aware of the issue and I see that we have funds set aside for schools to have period products in their bathrooms or things like that, I'm like, well, why was that a need? Why is that something that we needed to set aside? And hopefully doing more research. I will be honest, some necessarily don't, but for those that are curious and genuinely want to learn more about the subject, being able to reach out to folks and like Laura said, not having legislators where you're not the only person that's had this conversation with them is, I think, reassuring as well.
Andrea, I know making periods easier has been on kind of a similar timeline of existence for Georgia STOMP. So I know you've seen so many things change through your work there. Have you seen changes in the legislative, financial, cultural barriers in your work?
It's been almost night and day. From now there's plenty of both women and men that are having outward conversations about how the legislation has actually considered having entertained the idea of reducing the sales tax, or the conversation about getting more access to girls and other menstruators who may not have had access before. And so that's been a major shift. What I also have seen is more interest in doing research around period poverty in the States versus it being some, conversation about what's happening in other parts of the world. We're actually taking time, energy, and money and researching how period poverty has affected young women and girls and other menstruators in our states, and specifically in Georgia. So that's been so refreshing, because as a researcher, we always want to see, well, not all of us, but I want to see research move into practice. And so how can this research affect us better? So I've seen so much more emphasis on trying to get information out and doing research. And it's because of the work of Georgia STOMP and others.
I know we're all thirsty to see papers published out of Georgia soon with some of those conclusions. So thank you for your work there. Dominique, round us out. How have you seen those three barriers change in your work?
I think the three previous panelists really shed light on it, but I think something different, Adele, which is that we've discussed, is just among women destigmatizing the conversation. Like, you joined our league this past holiday and we had an open conversation about our stories around menstruation, personal problems that we've had, access issues that maybe some of our members have had or had witnessed. And I think it's getting, I think this broader conversation is allowing also women to talk about this more openly. there was a previous comment about how parents and young girls feel shame. And that's something that we discussed in that conversation. When you have your first cycle, like, who do you tell? How do you feel? And we all had these very awkward stories around that none of us had shared with each other, but were all very similar. And so I think the biggest thing for me has been seeing women empowered. Like, I'm 41, and I don't think up until then I had really had an open conversation like that. And I've been menstruating since I was 12 years old. That's a lot of years to go without really having an honest conversation with a group of menstruators about what it is to be a menstruator and what comes with that and the feelings that are attached to that. And so I think that that's one of the biggest changes that I've seen. Not only are we busy educating the public, but also just being comfortable with ourselves to have that conversation. When you first looped me into this work and I brought it back to my lead, it was like, are we really talking about that? And it's like, yes, we're going to talk about it out loud. And so I think that the change in comfort level and just the release of shame and insecurity around having these conversations is one of the biggest things that I've seen.
Well, as you know, that was one of my favorite events ever. It was so empowering to be able to have that shared experience with other women, and it even trickled outside of that Zoom room, and the conversations that I ended up having with my husband after that were great about how, as a guy in middle school, you just think that period products are available in the girls' restroom, because why wouldn't they be? And so, I mean, what a kind of revolutionary thought. There were so many benefits that came out of that shared conversation. And thanks for having me. Well, we've talked a lot about access to products, but for this last question, Andrea, I'm going to start with you because you brought it up, and how the fact that an elimination of the sales tax on menstrual products in Georgia was really something that sparked some conversations for you and your circle. And so I'd ask you, why does that elimination of the sales tax matter?
I've had a lot of conversation with a lot of different people about that, the elimination of that sales tax and what it represents. And for so many, they look at it as if it's such a small amount of money. Why are you all concerned about it? Why is this something, or why is this the hill you're willing to die on? And it's really not just about the money. It's more about what it represents for women to be treated equally, and receive true equity in our state, and to be valued by the people who, we're 50% of the population. At the very least, we're 50%. And why are we unfairly taxed by something that is just as natural as what other people experience? So I think that eliminating that sales tax will be great. But I think it's more representative of how our state values its women.
Wow. Yeah. Amber, follow up for us. Why does that matter to you and Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies of Georgia?
And I couldn't have said it any better than Andrea, but I'll add that for our population specifically, after giving birth, people do bleed for, an extended period of time. And so having products that they're able to take care of themselves, we send out pads and other, only pads, because you're only supposed to use pads in your postpartum period. But yeah, we send pads out to folks in our postpartum care kits, and we know how essential that product is. It's like when you're dealing with a baby, the last thing you want to think about is, I have to shell out however many dollars to have these heavy, absorbing products for my health, and knowing that you can't insert other things. So I think just understanding why that would help that specific population, because we do live in a state where when you're talking about moms and babies, people are pretty receptive. So I think making that connection, and then also pointing out how on the one hand, folks say, it's not a lot of money, like Andrea said, why is this a hill you're willing to die on? But then when you talk about eliminating the sales tax, suddenly it's too much money that the state loses. So I think pointing out that kind of hypocrisy too helps in terms of talking about the sales tax.
Yep, absolutely. Dominique, what do you have to add? Why does this matter to you?
Oh, you're like, yes, yes, amen, amen. Not only is it a fairness issue or a show of being valued, but really it is a dollar and cents issue. Like, equal pay day is the 24th. We already know that women in our country are not paid enough. Like, I Googled quickly to see like where are we at now. So generally women are paid 82 cents on the dollar compared to men. And then we know that breaks down by race, with different races, being paid different amounts on the dollar. I want all my money. I want all my money. I work hard for it. And it says here that if you look at a typical 9-to-5 workday, women start working for free at 2:40 p.m. So if I'm already working for free, why then are you penalizing me on top of that? And like Amber said, people are like, it's not a lot of money, but then all of a sudden $10 million out of $1 billion budget is a lot of money when we're asking for it back. So that's why I feel really passionate about that, because, we're saying that, trying to decide how I want to phrase it, but I think it's a message about who's valued in our society and what's valued in our society. And I also think it touches on, issues of reproductive justice. And as we begin to have that conversation more broadly too, I think it will loop in the elimination of sales tax and the importance of access to products and greater equity for women.
Completely agree. Completely agree. Laura, tough hacks to follow, but I know you can do it.
All of that, everything they said, 100%. And to add on one more aspect of what Dominique was talking about is when you eliminate the sales tax, people look at the product differently on a broader scale. So legislators, FEMA and GEMA, just putting it in the recovery or the packages you get, relief aid packages. I think that it's everything that the other ladies said more eloquently than I can, but also that it adds another layer of respect and another layer of thinking about these products as necessities and not want to items. Ain't none of us wanting to have this, but we've got to have them. So.
Gosh, perfect. Well, y'all, thank you so much. This was, I've taken notes, even though I get to talk to y'all. I'm lucky enough to get to talk to y'all on a relatively regular basis. I've still taken notes because I take away so much from your words every time we speak. So thank you for your time. I know that I'm itching to figure out what can be done with all of these barriers. How can we continue to chip away at them? And so that's what we'll cover on our next panel. So if I can ask the next group of panelists to go ahead and turn on their video cameras, I will hand it over to Claire and we'll move on.
I'm here. Took me a second to get here, but I'm here. We're going to look now, and I'm seeing the other panelists come in. We're going to look now at what can be done. And this is where we really do march towards menstrual equity. Boy, I was inspired by that last group and actually laughed out loud a couple of times with some of the things in wonderful ways, and enjoyed being that and being an observer in that one. As we move into this one, if you do have any, if you're part of the audience and have any questions that you want to put on Facebook, we'll glance over there in a minute. And if we have any time at the end, we'll bring back everybody on. But let's move on into our last panel now about what can be done. And let me introduce to you Elena Entreri. She is an attorney and experienced public policy professional who currently serves as Director of Advocacy and Social Justice at the YWCA of Greater Atlanta. In that role, Elena leads the Georgia Women's Policy Institute, which trains Georgia women in legislative and policy advocacy. The YWCA of Greater Atlanta is one of the 3 organizations who initially came together to form Georgia STOMP. And Mallory Crosby is with us. She's a member of the Junior League of Columbus and is currently serving as the chair of Junior Leagues of Georgia, the chair of the State Public Affairs Committee for Junior Leagues of Georgia, advocating for legislation that impacts women, children, and other vulnerable populations. And she's a graduate of the YWCA of Greater Atlanta's 2020 Georgia Women's Policy Institute. And then we have Ashley Boyle, is the advocacy chair at Period Project at the University of Georgia and a 4th-year student in the College of Public Health there. After discovering the startling lack of period product dispensers in campus restrooms, she, alongside a team of women, developed an initiative to install free product dispensers in every bathroom at UGA. And we've also asked Adele to sit in on this panel and speak a little bit more about what the coalition has done and be from that perspective as well. So thank you, Adele, for sitting in as a panelist. So each of the people on this panel, all of whom are involved in Georgia STOMP, have been moved to action. While they are amazing, they are. They're not superwomen. They're advocates like you. Georgia STOMP is a grassroots advocacy organization. We've seen advocacy proven effective. This panel will cover ways for each of you to get involved and help move Georgia towards a more equitable state. So let's start now. Advocacy isn't always calling a legislator about an issue. Each of you have made a mark through your work. So let's first hear what's maybe your favorite thing or signature thing that you have done to bring menstrual equity to your little corner of the world. So let's start with Elena. Let's start with you. What's the favorite thing that you've worked on or a signature thing that you've done in this space of menstrual equity?
Sure. So I was fortunate enough to kind of inherit what I'm going to call my signature thing. When I came to the YWCA last year, one of the groups of fellows was working on the bill to get the sales tax repealed along with members of the STOMP coalition. And so I had already had awareness of the issue, but I first came to the issue from a little bit of a different vantage point. In my previous work, I came to the issue thinking about women experiencing homelessness and their lack of access to period products. And so this was a little bit of a different take on it and really opened my own eyes to the larger need that exists out there. And I think what makes me happy about it having been a GWPI project is that the whole theory of GWPI is that you educate women to become advocates and really to tap into the skill sets that they already have and may not realize that they have in order to create this ripple effect out in the world. And so, let's say last year's group of fellows was eight fellows working on this project, although it was not ultimately successful in that the sales tax wasn't repealed. We now have 8 women who are really knowledgeable about the issue and committed to it and will go forward to spread the word. And then hopefully those people who they spread the word to will spread the word some more, and so on and so forth, and grow the call for change in this space.
Absolutely. We were thrilled last year when that was part of the work. Mallory, so since you were a part of that, why don't we go to you next and you talk about your favorite or signature thing? It may be related.
Thanks, Claire, and thanks for having me. I'm actually going to talk about an activity that happened about a year after Georgia STOMP was formed here in Columbus, Georgia. And we had a member who went to one of the Capitol days and heard about what Georgia STOMP was doing to repeal the tax. And she wanted to get involved and just thought, how can I do that? And so she actually came back from that day and reached out to a few other organizations in our area and pulled together an event where people brought products. We had the conversation. We had legislators there We had educators there. We got to hear from the Boys and Girls Club. We got to hear from the Muskogee County School District. And we also got to hear from Girls Inc. about the actual need in our community. And that was truly eye-opening. And this one person, and she had some help along the way from these other organizations, but this one female was moved to bring us all together. We ended up raising, I think, about 23,000 period products that we donated to the organizations who needed it, like the school district, the Boys and Girls Club, and Girls Inc. And then we also were able to raise $4,000 in this one 2-hour session at a free room at the education building. And it was just really moving to see, one, we are coming together as a community to provide these products. We start talking and hearing about how many products nurses are going through, and then putting them in contact with people like you and Claire, so that we can really start to look at what do we need in this state and how can we work together to form this and do this. And that has taken off from there. There's been more groups that have joined because of that. And there have been closets in some of the schools where the need is really great, where you can donate those period supplies. So it's just been incredible to see that one person was moved and what the impact she had on her community right here down the street, and not just something you hear on TV that maybe someone thinks, oh, I can't do that. She just felt the need and she did it. And I was so grateful to be a part of that conversation.
Absolutely. How inspiring. And that's what we want to get the message across, is that everybody can do something to be a part of this. And I just love that story. Got family in Columbus actually, and heard a little bit about it through them as well as through our Georgia STOMP work. So wonderful. Well, let's move to that from there to Ashley, who has had a similar type work at UGA and is making a difference there along with other young women. Tell us about it, Ashley.
Yeah, so I was part of a team that developed a pilot program to bring period products into all gender restrooms on UGA's campus. So currently the pilot program has a dispenser in 2 all gender restrooms. We're expanding to a 3rd this week, hopefully. And then our overall goal is that we will no longer need to be part of the project, because these dispensers will just be absorbed into UGA's facilities budgets and then expanded to every single restroom on campus.
Great. Well, Adele, how about you? What's your favorite or signature thing that maybe you've done it through Junior League work or maybe through Georgia STOMP? What's something that you think about bringing menstrual equity to this corner of the country and the world?
Yeah, it's so hard to think about, because the field is ripe with opportunity. And I think that advocacy work is so fun because you can really play to your strengths and however you do want to get involved. But I would say one thing that kind of changed how I looked at our advocacy work actually came out of conversation with one of our friends over at the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence, where she really reframed the conversation for me. We'd been doing a lot of coalition building and talking about who's kind of adjacent to our lane and who can we loop into the conversation, who would help educate us. And the conversation that we had with her was based around, like, when you think of the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence, you might just be thinking about survivors of domestic violence, but these are people with jobs and homes and families. They're full, multifaceted human beings. And so it changed how I thought about who could be involved in this conversation with us, because all of a sudden I realized to think about menstruators only as menstruators is so reductive. The conversation is so much broader. And so that was really game changing. And I think that coalition building outside of maybe the typical lanes has become Georgia STOMP's signature thing in some ways. So grateful for that.
I'm gonna stay with you. How's this work changed the way you think about menstruation, or has it? I think it might have, and if so, how?
I think from a personal perspective, I wish I could say like I'm like an earth goddess now, and that I am totally you know like welcome menstruation when it visits me, but I'm not. So but I think from a structural and a systemic perspective, I think about menstruation in the way that I think about so many other indicators that I look to for a benchmark for equity, whether it's menstruation in the context of race, it's menstruation in the context of socioeconomic status, it's menstruation in the context of age, and what's it like to be a menstruator who then has gone through menopause, and like how are you kind of marginalized as a member of that community, and like just thinking about so many different people who maybe have not been part of the main conversation or part of the mainstream, who have been marginalized in some way. I think that's really become apparent to me through this work.
How about you, Mallory? How's this work and being involved in this changed the ways you think about menstruation?
It has really opened my eyes to needs that I wasn't aware of. I actually was having this conversation with my husband earlier today, getting ready for this, that I wasn't aware of my privilege until I heard about this. I didn't occur to me that not everyone has access to products that they need, that they couldn't buy them. One of the first things that stuck with me when I learned about this issue a few years back was some girls are missing school because they don't have products. And it just goes to Adele's point. What is that doing to us as women as we, maybe if those girls are missing a day of school, and then so you're in school at 9 months, so you've missed 9 weeks of school. What's happening to you? Where are you on this pipeline? How are you getting ahead? And why are girls having to experience this? And I was shocked. I was shocked that this was happening in our community. At the event I was speaking about earlier, we had a school nurse there, and she told us about how many products they need a week in one school in our county. And the number was staggering, because it just didn't occur to me that this was happening in my backyard. You think about it. I don't think in terms of I live in the United States that this is happening here. I think of that as happening in a third world country. Well, no, it's happening right here, and we need to address it here. And it's going to continue to hold women back if we can't make sure they're in school, if we can't make sure that they have these basic necessities ultimately free to them. Because why should a young girl miss school because she doesn't have what she needs to go to school, like pencil and paper, anything like that, everything that people have been saying on the panels.
Yeah. I think you touched on something that was one of those aha moments for me anyway, and maybe Adele too, of there's incredible work going on right now with collection of products and distribution of products and donation of products. And I think you in Columbus, I heard it was one of the discussions that came out of that event was almost how is this sustainable? This is a little bit of an issue right now that's getting more press and media coverage than something else. Maybe in the future, something else comes along that gets the public attention. We need to address this systemically so that it's not continuing like it's always been, women helping women in this area, and that it's more a part of just life. How about you, Elena? How has this work changed the way you think about menstruation?
Sure. So as I said, I really came to this issue through the homeless services lens. And so it was obvious to me that there are certain groups of women who are very vulnerable and have a dire need for period products. But coming to GWPI and to this work, really kind of checked me and helped me realize that it's not just those folks who we might think of as having a very obvious need, but rather there are so many people who menstruate who have a need and it goes unseen. So that was a critical sort of learning for myself. Also, I think one thing that I've recognized, not just working on this issue, but on the whole sort of gamut of what we call women's issues, but I mean that in the most expansive way, in Georgia, is that at the legislature that is very much male dominated, there is just a fundamental lack of understanding, concern, interest in women's issues to some degree, and that we need to really over and over again be doing that education and really tying this issue to the full range of issues. I think Andrea spoke in the last panel about how, yes, the repealing the sales tax is important substantively, but also as a symbolism of how we value women and menstruators, and how we sort of respect their place in society. So that is really important. And also just basic, from a very basic standpoint, I think like probably most of you, I grew up really having periods be a very taboo issue. Like, we don't talk about our period. So just having sort of gaining the freedom to be able to talk about periods and the impact that they have and what it means for menstruators' lives is really important. And I get that importance now.
Yeah, that was a life change for me too, to get beyond that. It's not something we don't talk about, and it is something that we can and do talk about. Ashley, how about you? How's this work changed the way you think about menstruation?
Yeah, I think a lot of my realizations are echoed in both Elena and Mallory's responses. When we were first developing this pilot program, we decided to send out a survey over the summer to get a feel for the menstrual equity needs on UGA's campus. And it feels almost silly to say it now, but when we sent out that survey, I was really worried that the responses we were going to get was that, like, oh, it's actually fine for me, like, not an issue. Because my perspective of UGA was that it's an expensive state school filled with kids who grew up in the suburbs. And the results totally blew me away and like really checked me on who my neighbors are and who is attending this school and what kind of needs that they have, and how the not having access to period products has affected how they get their education. Even beyond that, when we were promoting our program, there was like an article that the newspaper wrote about what we were doing. And I looked at some of the Facebook comments, and which is always a mistake, but what people were saying was really surprising to me, because many people didn't have an issue with putting period products on campus, but a lot of people took issue with the fact that they were in all gender restrooms rather than just a women's restroom. So that really opened my eyes to how far we have to go with gender equity and gender justice, and how like the conversation around menstrual equity really should be as inclusive as possible as we start moving toward just a more just society for people of all gender identities.
Thank you. Thank you. So the next, oh, wait a minute. Did I do it now? Yeah, I did all y'all. Okay. Sorry. What do you think would be effective? So the next question is, what do you think would be effective for those attending to do following this to build a better tomorrow? And that sort of leads into our other question. I think I'm going to combine the two of them. And what do you wish would come out of this town hall? What can people do, and what could be some results that come from this work? Oh, and let's start with, how about Mallory?
I'm glad you combined that, because I was trying to figure out what would I say to both of these. But yeah. The biggest thing that I have seen is just the need for education. Talking about it, I think people on the last panel said it. it's hard for me to talk about it. Even, telling my mom today about, hey, I'm doing this, I'll send you the link. And I said, do you want to send it to dad? He might not want to watch it because of what it's about, but that's what we need. We need men in our corner to talk about these things. We need to educate them. They don't know what they don't know. We also do need to educate women. There are some women who still don't get it. They don't understand what this is about and why it matters for this equity to happen. And talk to your husbands, your brothers, your sons, your nephews, talk to your daughters, your nieces, talk to people about this, talk to your girlfriends. If you have a book club, talk to your book club about it. It's something that is taboo, and the more we can educate people on what others don't have, or that, this tax is for women only. You can't purchase these products with, WIC or other substantial entities that are to help us. So talk to your friends about it. And we did have a great event in Columbus. That seems really overwhelming for a lot of people. So think in terms of what's one small thing you can do. If you know 2 people you can talk to about this, do that. If you have a professional women's group that you're a part of, maybe this is a topic you guys can talk about. Maybe if once we get back to meeting together, if you have a luncheon with that, you can ask that people bring products and you donate those to a local organization that means a lot to you, whether it's a homeless shelter or the Boys and Girls Club. Talk to people who work there, find out what their needs are. One thing that I've started doing now when we do see that items are needed for local organizations, I always check to see, do they need feminine products? And that's what I donate now versus canned goods or clothing, just things like that. What's one little thing you can do? If you can just buy an extra pack every time you're out and about and donate it to an organization, that's really something that you can do that's impactful. You don't have to write a bill. You don't have to call your legislators. I know that gets overwhelming and scary if you've never done it before. But even then, they aren't experts on everything. So if you can become an expert or know a little bit more and educate them, that's what's needed. They're people just like the rest of us, and we just have to let them know what's important to us in order to make this change. And I also just want to say, remember, it's going to take time. Women started fighting for the right to vote 100 years before it happened. So this is not going to happen overnight. So we just have to persevere. We're really great at that, I think, as women and advocates and people who want to move things forward. Just remember, it takes time, but every single conversation you have, every person that you make aware of this, we're one step closer to getting where we need to be.
Excellent. Thank you, Mallory. That was wonderful. How about you, Elena? What do you think would be effective for those listening right now to do to be a part of building a better tomorrow, or what could come out of this town hall?
Sure. I think everything Mallory said is definitely spot on. Contribute where you can, especially in terms of donating, et cetera. I always think about change in terms of systems. So I do want you to educate yourself and call your legislators. I really think that what Mallory hit on is so important. And again, it's the whole premise of GWPI. Everybody thinks like your legislators are so well versed on every issue that comes across their desk and that they know so much, when it's just not true. There are thousands and thousands of issues that people are pursuing every year at the Capitol. And so you really can, through making yourself knowledgeable, have something to contribute to your legislators and their knowledge of issues to help them move things forward. So educate yourself and don't be afraid to reach out to your legislators. And I would also say, I think we tend to focus a lot about state level advocacy, but you can do advocacy at your city council level and your more local level entities who do have some ability to make more granular change in this space. And I tend to think that those sort of small incremental changes at the more local level can build up to create the momentum for change at the state level. So make yourself a little bit of an expert and don't be afraid to reach out to your local and state level elected officials.
Great additions. Thank you, Elena. Yes. How about you, Ashley? What do you think would be effective for folks to do after this?
I would just encourage people to take a look at what communities they're a part of and see what changes can be made. So for example, I'm a student at UGA, so I looked at changes I could be making at the university level. But for someone else, that could be maybe looking at their church or their religious facility, their children's schools, trying to think like your local grocery store, even like anything that you are doing or that you feel a part of, that you feel like could be made, that you feel like could be improved toward menstrual equity. Those changes matter. And I think you might be surprised at once you start contacting the right people and developing your case, things can move pretty quickly toward the result that you want to see, especially when it's on that small scale. Another Facebook comment that made me laugh, when we were like looking through, somebody commented saying, okay, but what does this do for the world? It was like, well, I mean, I don't know what it does for the world, but I think these products are making a difference in menstruators' lives on campus. And like, that's what matters, because that's where we're throwing our stone right now. And those small changes do add up to make a change in the world. So yeah, I would just hope that everyone would be inspired to take a small step toward improving their surroundings and then encouraging others to do the same.
I love that, Ashley. And a minute ago, Laura Register talked about going into a business where she saw the products. And it reminded me then that I was on a panel about something completely different and started talking about going into a brew pub up in DC where they had period products and all. And I got a message after that panel, a young man that was on that panel with me, another subject matter, who added to his business. He owns a local coffee shop, and he said, I'd never thought about providing those products in the bathroom before, and now he does. So yeah, your little corner of the world. And as Elena said, I think it was Elena, you know, if it starts local, then maybe Mallory said this, that it can start growing and catch on at the state level and other places. So Adele, what would you like to have come out of this town hall, and what do you think it would be effective for people to do to build a better tomorrow?
Yeah, I'm feeling greedy because I want all of the things that everybody said on the panel before me. So it was so perfectly tailored to kind of so many things that we've seen be effective, whether it is as Laura said, thanking a restaurateur who has period products in their bathroom. You know, when folks see you do that, when their employees see you do that, when they hear a thanks for it, that's the ripple effect is very real and very powerful. And we never know where those conversations go from there, but that is a critical step in changing culture. And so if that's your comfort level, that's fantastic, and reward people for good behavior and ask that people have good behavior if you don't see period products in bathrooms and you think there should be them there, whether that's at your workplace or at a public facing restroom in a business. So I think that's really fantastic. And I love hearing echoes of each panel on each subsequent panel today. I think that's really beautiful. I would say, though, that systems really are more malleable than we think. And so to kind of lift up what Elena said, and Ashley, I think you even said too, like it can just be one conversation. And as Elena said, like these legislators aren't experts. Your one conversation with them can be their introduction to the issue. And so we have so many success stories to prove that fact in Georgia through the work of Georgia STOMP, whether it's a single conversation with the director of the Georgia Emergency Management Agency, who then says, oh yeah, let's add period products as basic needs to the supplies that can be purchased with grants that come from GEMA. And then that creates a whole different reality for people who happen to be affected by a natural disaster or an emergency. Like that was one conversation that created this huge systemic impact. And so I just think maybe a byproduct of being told that menstruation is shameful or is something that we shouldn't talk about publicly, maybe that starts to create this environment where we think that we shouldn't ask for too much, or we shouldn't ask for what we need and what we deserve. But I think that's exactly what we should do. We should take up space and occupy the spaces where we belong, whether that's school, even if you're menstruating, whether that's an elected official's office, it doesn't matter. And so that's what I would say is, you know, don't self-limit. We can break down the barriers that impact menstrual equity in Georgia by not doing that. And I know, Claire, we have some actual tangible things that people can do to be aware of Georgia STOMP's actual efforts on the state. So I don't know how you'd like to transition to those.
We can transition there. I'd like to, before we do that though, let's everybody come back on screen and just look again and thank this just wonderful group of women that have been a part of this conversation, but more importantly, are a part of this work in the state of Georgia to make these changes. I don't think it's too much to say, because we get calls, Liddell and I get calls all the time. Georgia is a leader in this space, in the menstrual equity space. We get calls to find out how we're doing this down here. So how we're doing this down here is because of this group of women and many others that are doing this work in the state. So one, I want to say thank you. But then Adele, if you want to take us into kind of directly what people can do, I'll share the screen with some contact information. You can kind of tell about how to get in touch with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. And to our panelists, we're just so grateful. Thank you so much for your time tonight. And thanks so much to the folks who are on Facebook Live following along. So Claire's got our great social media accounts and our email address and our website all up on the screen now. Go to georgiastomp.com and learn more about the 4 pillars of work that the folks on this panel help us gain progress in, and the successes that we've had so far. You can follow us on social media, on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And on our website, we do send out email updates on a relatively regular basis, especially during session. Claire is the leader of Tax-Free Tuesdays, where she sends out information about direct advocacy work you can do on a weekly basis. And so go to our website to sign up for those email updates. We always love to hear that folks are making calls to legislators, and they really, really, really do work. 2 other steps, consider groups that you're connected to. If, as Ashley said, these could be service organizations, period supply groups, your religious organization. Do any of them need to explore what it would look like to join in on this work, to step in and support their menstruating members? We'd be happy to help out with that, either through having them join the coalition or just talking about the work that we do. So we're always happy to come and do a program to educate folks on menstrual equity or poverty elimination work in Georgia that impacts menstrual equity or period poverty. And we've even, one of our favorite things that we've done was tailored our programming to groups as young and as small as a single Girl Scout troop, and which was just an absolute joy. Or a local League of Women Voters group, to even talking to the communities and schools of Georgia state gathering. So like groups that have massive networks that they go back to in their corners of Georgia and educate folks from there. So in closing, if you didn't share this event at start when it's converted and saved on our Facebook page, please do share it then with a note about what we chatted about tonight, maybe some of your key takeaways, or ask for the YouTube link. We're always happy to share that. Thank you again to our panelists and to Rachel Gamble for assuring our technical ability. It's key in the age of COVID. And with that, thank you so much. Good night. I'm on cloud 9. We appreciate all your input. Thank you.